talk about the reproductive system today, and we will start with the female reproductive system. However, let me just tell you that in the fetal stage of development, prior to about 9 weeks of pregnancy, or what we call 9 weeks of gestation, if you were to look at the fetus, you could not tell on the outside whether it was a boy or a girl. So there's no external genitalia at all. After about the 9th week of pregnancy, the external genitalia begins to form. And that is completely dependent on the chromosomes. So we've talked about this before. You know, for a female, the chromosomes look like 2 X's. For a male, the chromosomes look like... Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm totally fine.
Okay. Just push her away.
Okay, sweetheart. I
The
think she wants
chromosome...
some pork
I'm more than sure she wants pork rinds. The chromosomes look like an X and a Y for a male. Now, in the male, during this gestational period, around the 10th week of pregnancy, that baby starts to secrete testosterone. And testosterone is responsible for making this external genitalia grow. So if you look at, for instance, the clitoris of the female, I think I have a picture. Let me look and see. There we go. So if you look at this external genitalia of the female, and you look at the clitoris of the female, the clitoris and all of the tissue surrounding it, if it is exposed to testosterone, will then form into a penis. The labia minora and the labia majora here, if it's exposed to testosterone, will then form into the testicular sacs. And by the way, the urethral opening here, along with the clitoris, I forgot to point this out, all becomes the penis area. And then, of course, there's no vaginal opening. That's closed up. So what that means is, for the male, his external genitalia forms because testosterone is causing the change in those tissues. For the female, there's no hormones necessary for her external genitalia to look like a female. Which means that, let's say we have this male fetus who has something wrong and cannot secrete enough testosterone. When that male baby is born, his external genitalia will look like a female's, because there wasn't enough testosterone to turn that into the male external genitalia. And a lot of times the parents don't even know that internally their female child is actually male. Has XY chromosomes and has internal genitalia like growing testes, things like that. Externally, they think that they have a female. There are no true hermaphrodites in humans. So this is as close to a hermaphrodite as a human gets. Where the external genitalia looks female, the internal genitalia is male. The only problem is, although that internal genitalia grows, it doesn't fully complete growth, and so they don't have any working internal genitalia. So we don't have a true functioning hermaphrodite in humans. Okay? So by the time their child gets to puberty, where you think this little girl is supposed to start growing breasts and have a menstrual cycle, it doesn't happen. And many times this is when the parents finally know that hormonally, genetically, the child is actually really male. And believe it or not, the majority of parents and children will opt to go through surgery so the external genitalia matches what the chromosomes match. Because, here's another thing, depending on our chromosomes, this also tells us how to wire the brain. And I think you probably have noticed by now, the way males think and the way females think are not quite the same. They behave and think and act a little bit differently from each other. And so in these children, usually the brain is wired to be more male than female. Even though they've been raised as a female, they feel more like they're male because that is really the way the brain is wired. So many of them opt to have their external genitalia changed to male. Now, what you can do, and it's very interesting, I have students who give me certain things like at the end of the semester. And one semester, a gentleman who was in my class who had also been in the Navy, decided that he would gift me with a movie, and it was his adventures in Thailand. So part of his adventures was in the prostitute district, and so part of this movie was these females who had been exposed to testosterone later on in life. And so what they did is, as adults, they gave themselves injections of testosterone into the clitoris. And if you do that, you can form a penis. Now, if you do it too late in life, the penis will only get to be maybe about 3 inches long. For these children who have external genitalia that looks like female, if you do this at puberty, they can actually normally, naturally, with testosterone, grow a fully functioning penis. All that has to happen after that is they have to have the vaginal opening closed up because it is not functioning at that point. Okay. Unfortunately for them, they also do not have functioning testes because of the fact that they did not grow completely. But all you have to do is give injections of testosterone. You don't have to do any type of massive surgery in order to be able to give them a functioning penis, which is very nice for the child. One other thing I want to point out to you is this section right here. This is called the perineum. It is either in a female between the vaginal opening and the anus, or in the male, it's between the underside of the testicular sac and the anus. This perineum really doesn't do much. It's not really very important throughout our lives, except if you are working with burn patients, okay? So individuals who are caught in fires and their bodies begin to burn, one of the things that we see kind of as a natural stress reaction is they go into a fetal position, which means that they're bringing their arms together, they're bringing their legs up, and they're bringing their butt in. Got a lot of pucker power going on there. And for them, that's actually very important because there is a really high chance that if the person survives, this small area, maybe about the size of a quarter of skin, also survives. So you may have this patient who is burnt over 99% of their body, but that one little area of skin is still intact. And since our skin is an organ, we have to have like an organ transplant if we lose our skin. And we can reject certain types of skin that we might get as a transplant. So if we can grow our own skin when we lose it, it is so much better for us because then we wouldn't reject it. So in this patient, you've got a couple problems now because they don't have any skin. You're going to put pig skin over top of them in the meantime. And you're going to put them into a medically induced coma because it's really painful. The reason you put the pig skin on them is one, so that they don't lose all their water and dehydrate and die. And two, because the bugs can't get in. So you wrap them head to toe in this pig skin. And then you take this really interesting instrument, it's electric, and it's almost like a shaver, and you shave off that one piece of perineum skin and put it into like a cookie sheet, okay? And you put medium in there, and you oxygenate it, and you let that sucker grow. And you grow it in a full sheet of skin. And you'll grow after that multiple sheets of skin in order to wrap it now around your patient, hopefully if you can keep them alive long enough to get all that skin to grow, especially if they've lost a lot of their skin. If you ever have the opportunity to do a rotation at Arrowhead, see if you can go into their burn ward. It's absolutely fantastic. They have one of the top burn wards in all of Southern California, and they grow their own skin there. And it's just an awesome experience. And it's just really, really nice. And so a lot of people, their skin is coming from the perineal region because it's the only thing that could potentially be left.
About how long does it take for the skin to grow into a full sheet?
It's usually a few weeks. Oh, for one sheet?
Or like, because you said
It's usually about a
have to
week.
keep them alive, so how long until they can get
So you get that perineum to grow, you take a piece off and put it in another sheet and grow it. So within a couple of weeks, you've got enough skin for the whole body.
Oh.
Yeah. Now you may have to do multiple transplants over time because some will fall off, you gotta do more. You know, there's all kinds of different things that you have to do over time. But it usually, to initially wrap them, is about 2 weeks.
So they shave all the skin off of that area?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so you mentioned that, you know, the skin is obviously an organ, and I know with stem cells, if you take stem cells and grow a heart or a liver or whatever, can you do that with skin too?
They are doing that now, yes.
Okay.
But you,
Or is it a
yeah.
long time? Like it takes a really long time?
if I have skin to grow,
Mhm.
it will be faster than if I use stem cells.
Okay. I was
So best to hope for a little bit of skin left for them to be able to grow it. Now, by the way, the clitoris, okay, because it also turns into the penis, tells you that it has the same neurological and blood supply as the penis would. So that means that it's also connected in the same area in the female brain as in the male brain. So basically the clitoris is, like for the male, the organ of orgasm. And then underneath that you have the urethral opening so that urination can occur. And then you have the vaginal opening, which leads up eventually to the uterus. Then there are these little glands right here. These are called the Brunner's glands. And Brunner's glands secrete a mucousy substance that keeps this entire area moist. And this area officially is what we would call the vulva, okay? And so if the Brunner's glands become infected, they'll crust over and there's not enough mucus secretion, and the vulvar region can become very dry and cracked and even begin to bleed. So it's just not a fun experience. Now, if you proceed up through the vaginal canal, up through the vaginal opening, excuse me, then you'll enter into the vaginal canal. So this is the pelvic bone here. Here we have the clitoris. This is the opening to the urethra leading up into the bladder. Then we have the vaginal canal leading up into the vaginal opening, excuse me, again, leading up into the vaginal canal, and then the uterus. And right here are our Brunner's glands, and then the rectal region. Now, the vaginal canal is very stretchy. However, it's lined with skeletal muscle, okay? And it has multiple different jobs. Of course, this is where the sperm is planted in order to fertilize an egg and have a baby. It's also going to have to stretch open because this is the birth canal where that baby is going to be able to come out. But another really important thing about the vaginal canal is it's like a really strong column that holds the uterus in place. The uterus sits on top of the vaginal canal. Now, in the unpregnant female, the uterus is about the size of like a walnut, okay? It's not very large. But of course, in the pregnant female, depending on how big that baby gets, it can really stretch out. Now, also, the skeletal muscle of the vaginal canal can really stretch out when that baby is born. So let's say you have a woman who has had 3, 4, 5 children. The vaginal canal can stretch quite substantially, and the problem is that eventually the uterus kind of stretches out too, becomes a little bit heavier. The connective tissue can't hold it well because the vaginal canal is too big, and the uterus falls out. So she wakes up in the morning, go to the bathroom, and she sees this dark purplish thing hanging out the vaginal canal, and it's her uterus. So once that happens, okay, and that's what we call a prolapsed uterus, and it happens quite frequently actually, she's going to have a hysterectomy and have the uterus removed. So it's not a real positive thing for the woman, and so one of the things that you need to suggest for her is that she needs to, after every pregnancy, after a little bit of recovery, do some exercises to strengthen the muscles, because they're skeletal muscle again. She's got control of this, of that vaginal canal. Because by strengthening the muscle, the canal shrinks in size and then can hold that uterus up. So this type of muscle exercise was first talked about by Dr. Kegel, so they call it the Kegel muscle exercises. And, you know, obviously, gentlemen, you don't have a vaginal canal, at least I don't think so, and so it's a little bit hard for you to understand, but in order to instruct your patient, you can kind of tell them, it's sort of like, you know, when you have to go to the bathroom and you just can't go yet, and so you know how you're squeezing it and holding it, it's that same kind of response. So you're going to squeeze those muscles in that vaginal area, and of course, you know, do like, 30 repetitions a couple times a day. I mean, you could be doing it in physiology class right now. We'd never know, okay? It's not a big deal. You'd be driving down the street waving to somebody. You never know you're doing your Kegel muscle exercises. You just want to squeeze those muscles firmly several times a day. Or you could also buy what are called Benoit balls. And these are stainless steel balls. They come in a little case, and they come in multiple sizes. And they start out very large and go down to the size of a pea. And the idea is you're supposed to be able to insert those into the vaginal canal and hold them while walking around. Now please, please, please do Dr. Harvey a really big favor. Please do not walk around with these in public. Okay? Because it's real seriously embarrassing when Dr. Harvey is like in Target picking something up really fast and in the same aisle with a woman who all of a sudden this little stainless steel ball goes ding, 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 down the aisle. And it's like, I know where that just came from and I am not happy right now. And she goes chasing it down the aisle and picks it up and pops it in her pocket. And it's just... it's yucky. Wear those in the privacy of your home and not in Target, because like when you bend over, sometimes things happen, okay? Please, please don't do that. It's kind of like, it always reminds me of a story, true story, because I was there when it happened. We're on Highland Avenue in San Bernardino, going down the street in a police car, and this guy's on the side of the road. He's waving us down, and he pulls the cop over. We both get out, and he's like, you see that woman right over there? She just robbed me. Well, she's a known prostitute, so the officer calls her over and says, hey, what happened? I did not rob him. He paid me for a job. Okay, well, how much did he pay you? $10. And he got a fair blowjob. Oh, wow. And the officer says, look, to the gentleman, he says, look, I'm sorry, you have to take this to civil court. This is not a crime, okay? And there's nothing I can do for you. It's my last $10 and I'm hungry and she's robbing me. And so the officer kind of looks at me and I'm like, whatever. And he goes to the girl, he goes, you know what? Give him his $10 back. Fine. So she lifts her leg and sticks it onto the bumper of the officer's car, takes her hand, puts it up inside her vaginal canal, and pulls out this dripping $10 bill. Tries to slap it into the officer's hand, who screams and jumps back. So she slaps it in the guy's hand, he grabs it, sticks it in his pocket, says thank you, and walks across the street to Taco Bell to buy his dinner. So when your mama tells you that money is dirty, she means money is dirty, okay? So you want to be real careful handling money. Wash those hands afterwards, okay? Because you never know where it actually came from. So do not tell your patients this is a good purse, okay? I could tell you other stories where I met a woman who actually had a 6-pack of beer up inside her vaginal canal.
Oh my God.
6-pack. All 6-pack. And what was worse, she was caught on video. It was amazing to watch. Just amazing. She actually put them in one at a time. Okay? Well-used vaginal canal. I told you it's stretchy, right? And she did it right in front of her 3-year-old.
Wow.
They were both in the liquor store at the same time. And I'm going, how did she walk out with that? She did not break one. She did not drop one. It was
People are
truly amazing. Now, of course, in the video that I saw, I witnessed women who had really practiced their Kegel muscle exercises. And these women were shooting darts out of the vaginal canal. And getting bullseyes, too, mind you. Of course, it helped in how much money they got paid by how well they did their Kegel muscle exercises. Just letting you know.
Was there like a balloon or something that they had to squeeze?
Just the Benoit balls. That's what they used. Just letting you know. Oh, one other thing. Take notice to the uterus here that sits up top of this vaginal canal. And notice how it's tilted forward. And it's tilted over top of that bladder there. So now imagine when she gets pregnant and she has this 7-8 pound baby inside there and it's pressing down on that bladder. It pops that sphincter open. And this is why she, number one, feels like she has to go to the bathroom all the time and has to be really careful of not peeing her pants because there's so much pressure on top of the bladder. Now, one other thing I want you to know about the vaginal canal is, like many other areas in the human body, there are a lot of bacteria and even some parasites in there, and they're there for a good reason. They keep other things out. Okay? So one of the things you want to be real careful of with your patient is telling them that douching is a no-no. It is not a good idea. The different bacteria that's in there helps to keep the vaginal canal highly acidic. And that acid environment keeps other things out. So in my experience, women who douche have visitors. So, you know, working at Loma Linda in the emergency room, you get certain women that come in, and there's certain, you know, experiences you have, like pulling giant flying cockroaches out of a woman's vaginal canal. It's true. Did you say you've seen fire ants?
No, she was asking how come, and I said, well, because the environment is no longer as acidic, so they can live up in.
That's right. They can move up and live inside there.
But that's really.
So you have to be
So she
very,
didn't
very
put it
careful.
there, it just crawled
It
up.
crawled up inside. Yeah, crawled up inside.
Jesus Christ.
So, no, I don't think he had anything to do with that, except that he might have made both of them, but anyway. Let's see, there are other things too besides, you know, stuff that you can buy at the store that people douche with. For instance, these are two of my favorite stories. One is a student showed me some x-rays of a patient of hers at one of the local hospitals, and the patient had come in complaining originally of upper right abdominal pain. Okay, that was the original complaint. Very, very painful. And they ran all kinds of tests on the liver, did ultrasounds. I mean, they just put her through a battery of tests. Now, keep in mind, one of the things that happens with your patients is that they don't always tell you everything. Number one, maybe they don't have the ability to because they're sick, or maybe they're not really that intelligent, or maybe they don't think of certain things to tell you, which is what this patient told the doctor finally. I never thought of telling you. And so they decided that they were going to do abdominal exploratory surgery on her, and when they did, they found something very interesting. They found a root embedded in her liver, and it was growing leaves. So they followed this root all the way back through the fallopian tubes, into the uterus, down into the vaginal canal. Because in her vaginal canal, this patient had douched with a small potato. Telling you, people insert all kinds of interesting things up there. I've seen people who have inserted eggs up there, and you have to go and flush all the shells out because it broke. So if you're going to do that, make sure it's hard-boiled, okay? But she put a potato up there. Now, potatoes like dark, warm, moist environments to grow in. Well, that's what it had. So it started to grow. It grew right through her abdomen and implanted on her liver, which is why she had that right upper abdominal pain. So they had to dig that root out and remove her potato. She was okay after that. Okay, but all-time favorite story, gotta tell you, all-time favorite story, was a woman who came into Loma Linda, and a lot of women are very embarrassed, you know, when they talk about their vulva region, and so they have a tendency to, you know, say down there, which I always love to look at their toes at that point. But she came in complaining that down there was very itchy, so the nurses took her into the back, and one of the nurses came out just dying from laughter, saying, "You have got to come see this," which means it's going to be good, right? And so they have her completely undressed. And you can see in this vulva region, she is actually from the belly button all the way down, across her thighs, all the way to the buttocks, she is covered in maggots.
Oh my goodness.
Just covered.
It's little things
No
that
wonder you feel
even
itchy.
in your eyes.
Ever think about brushing them off, maybe taking a shower? No, okay. So you're going to have some interesting people come into your ER. And so I, of course, had to know, how did this occur? Because that's just the way I am. I gotta hear this story. So she told me that 2 weeks prior, her boyfriend was coming over and they were gonna have sex. And she knew that he liked grape jelly. So she packed her vaginal canal with grape jelly.
Wow.
They had sex, and then she never took a shower.
For 2 weeks?
I told you, you're gonna meet some interesting people. Especially if you work down the hill like near San Bernardino, which is where Loma Linda is. Okay? And luckily for her, the kind of fly that these maggots come from is what we call a sarcophagid fly, which is a flesh-eating fly. You know those little flies that bite you, and you bleed and then ow, okay? That's the kind of flies that the maggots were from. Those flies only like to eat dead, decaying flesh. So as they started to grow and move around on her, they actually debrided her. And they're the reason that she lived. And you use those kind of maggots in the hospital a lot of times to debride things. And so she actually survived. They hospitalized her for a while, gave her some antibiotics, made sure she was okay, but she survived. And then they instructed her, don't pack grape jelly up there. I hope they instructed her on like peanut butter too, because that would probably be bad as well. But
Sorry, that was really out of place.
all right, so from the vaginal canal, you have the uterus. Now the mouth of the uterus is what we call the cervix, okay? Now the cervix, okay, the way that it's shown there, it looks like there's this massive opening in the cervix right here. That is not the case. This opening right here is actually microscopic, okay? Because when that giant flying cockroach gets into somebody's vaginal canal, you don't want it to be able to get up through this uterus, through the fallopian tubes, and then into the abdomen. That potato actually ruptured the cervical area to get through there and out the fallopian tubes, so there was some damage to her cervix. So this is very, very small. It's microscopic. And then on top of it, there's a really, really thick layer of mucus here, what they actually call like the mucus plug. Right before a baby's going to be born, that mucus plug will fall out. So it tells you you don't have very much time, okay, when the mucus plug falls out. And it is really quite thick mucus. Now, let me just back up for a second and tell you that the function of the reproductive system is to reproduce. It's not to have fun. People get that so confused, okay? And what I tell you this is because no matter what you try to do to thwart this reproductive system, people still have babies, okay? People get their tubes tied, they take birth control pills, and the human race is still increasing, okay? Condoms, I don't care what it is, that sperm and that egg, they're tricky, okay? And they want to come together and they want to form babies. And you would think by having this big mucus plug here that this might keep the sperm out. And you just have this little teeny tiny microscopic opening here in this muscle area, it would keep the sperm out, but it doesn't. That microscopic opening is just big enough for this little sperm to get through. And this mucus plug, if you look at it under a microscope, what you'll see is something very interesting. This mucus plug also has like little sperm freeways through it. I'm telling you, they're tricky devils. So that it's just big enough for a single sperm at a time to be able to get through. And so it does not stop the sperm where it might stop a giant flying cockroach, but that sperm still has the ability to get through that cervix. And then into the uterus, and then off to the fallopian tubes. Now, talking about the uterus, if you remember from anatomy, there's 3 layers to the uterus. The innermost layer is all we're really going to care about today. It's called the endometrium. And then the middle layer is all muscle. This is the myometrium. And then the outer layer, the perimetrium, is like a connective tissue layer on the top. Now just talk for a little tiny bit about the myometrium. That layer is not really super important in a woman's life until she's ready to deliver, or what we call parturition. And so when she's ready to deliver, that muscle needs to be able to contract, and it has to contract in a very particular pattern. We want the muscle, that myometrium, to contract from the top, or the fundus of the uterus, down, and then contract from the top down, and continue to contract in this pattern, because what it's doing is it's pushing that little parasite out. Okay? Squeeze that little thing out like a pimple. Now, no time in the woman's life can that uterus contract in that pattern until around the 9th month of pregnancy. Because during the 9th month of pregnancy, all the little muscle cells in her myometrium start forming gap junctions between each other. And as soon as those cells start forming gap junctions, they're able to talk to each other and to tell each other to contract. Now, she'll start to feel those little contractions, like little twitches, during that 9th month as more and more gap junctions form. And eventually, when all the gap junctions form, they'll know to contract in this downward pattern. Now, before all the gap junctions form, before labor begins, what do we call all that twitching of the muscles? Braxton Hicks. That's right, that's the name of the 2 doctors that figured this out. So that's where she starts to feel those little twitches and pains in the uterus. And then when you get that synchrony of contraction, we know that labor has started. Now we're really going to focus today on the endometrium, because this is the layer that once a month builds up, and then if she doesn't get pregnant, dies off. Okay, so we're going to talk about how it builds up, how it dies off. But off of the uterus are the fallopian tubes. And right underneath, but not attached to, just kind of right underneath the fallopian tubes, is the ovary. Now, the fallopian tubes, they're only about 4 inches long, and they're only about 1/4 of an inch in diameter. They're lined with cilia. And then at the end of them, they have those little finger-like projections, if you remember. They call them fimbriae. So that the fimbriae are always moving in a pattern kind of like this, okay? And it's sort of a sucking pattern. And it's sucking in water. That's on the outside of the uterus. Now, when an egg pops out or ovulates out of the ovary, okay, it's going to suck that egg in. And all the cilia that's lining the fallopian tube, or the oviduct, is all beating in one direction towards the uterus. So that that little egg starts to move those 4 inches into the uterus. Now, the sperm and the egg will typically meet right here at this little bend, what they call the ampulla. So if there's an egg present and a sperm present, fertilization usually occurs right here. And then the egg continues on its way after it's been fertilized into the uterus. Now, just so you can keep this in mind, because we're going to talk about this a little bit later, it actually takes 7 days for this poor little egg to go 4 inches. So it's a really slow journey for the egg to get into the uterus. Now, sometimes for some women, and this especially happens if sexually transmitted diseases are involved, these cilia can also die. And if the cilia die, then there's nothing to move that egg into the uterus. And if it gets fertilized here, it ends up staying in the fallopian tube. And on day 7, that fertilized egg will implant wherever it's at. So if it's in the fallopian tube, it plants there. If it's in the uterus, it plants there. So if it's in the fallopian tube and it starts to grow, since it's only 1/4 inch in diameter, it can't grow very much before it starts to put strain on that tube. And there's a lot of pain that the woman feels when she has what we would call a tubal pregnancy, because it's growing in the tube. If it grows too much, that tube will explode, it will rupture. And the likelihood is she would bleed to death before she ever got to a hospital. So there is no ability, at least at this point, for a baby that's growing in the tube to actually be removed and then transplanted into the uterus. So what the doctor is going to do is cut this tube off. Because number one, it's defective. That's why the egg planted in there in the first place. Even if they scrape the egg out, it would happen again most likely. Now she's got another tube, and just because one is defective does not mean the other one has to be. So she could still, get pregnant through the other tube if that's what she still wants. But that fallopian tube is going to have to be removed. Any questions so far? So we're going to talk about what happens in the ovaries and the monthly changes that occur in the ovaries, and then we'll go in and talk about the monthly changes that occur in the uterus and the hormonal issues. Okay, so the ovaries, just like a lot of other organs, they have a cortex around the outside and then a medulla in the middle. In the middle, where the medulla is, this is where all the blood vessels come in and the nerves. The cortex is where the eggs grow. Now, up until about 2 years ago, one of the things that I used to tell you is that a little girl is born with all the eggs she's ever going to have. We now know that's not true. Just like a little boy, a little girl, her eggs start to grow later in life, and now we know that they come from stem cells. So when the baby is born, she does have some stem cells in the ovaries, but they don't look like anything you might think of as an egg. Eventually, these stem cells will start to form this real immature looking egg, which is what's referred to as a follicle. Okay? And then those follicles just kind of sit there until puberty. It's like a word for growth. Okay, so the hypothalamus, obviously we've talked about it a lot in class so far. It's a very important area of the brain. And the other interesting thing about it, though, is it is actually the last part of the brain to totally mature. So you could say it's the slowest maturing part of the brain and doesn't completely mature until around the time of puberty. And so we know that the hypothalamus is finally totally mature when it first starts making GnRH, or gonadotropin releasing hormone. This hormone, GnRH, once it's secreted, is going to make its way to the anterior pituitary and cause the anterior pituitary to secrete 2 different hormones. So the anterior pituitary is going to release 2 different hormones. One is follicle-stimulating hormone. The other is luteinizing hormone. These come from the same cell in the anterior pituitary. So you know that we have these immature follicles. And so follicle-stimulating hormone is going to cause these follicles to mature, or we could also say cause these follicles to go through meiosis. And so when it goes through meiosis, you get a mature egg or you get a mature ova. Luteinizing hormone causes an increase in estrogen secretion. Okay, so again, we're going through the steps between luteinizing hormone and estrogen production. And this is, and I should put this in here, this is our ova or our oocyte, however you want to call it, surrounded by our granulosa cells and our theca cells. They are being stimulated by follicle-stimulating hormone to go through mitosis. The theca cells have receptors for luteinizing hormone. So our luteinizing hormone is going to bind to those receptors on the theca cells and cause the theca cells to increase production of a certain hormone. That hormone is testosterone. So I'm just going to put like a big T in here. We're going to make testosterone in the theca cells. Now, as soon as that testosterone is made by the theca cells, it's going to simply diffuse into the granulosa cells. Now, the granulosa cells contain a special enzyme. There's only two types of cells in the human body that contains this enzyme. It's the granulosa cells, which of course only females have, but also fat cells. And that would be in both males and females. And this enzyme in the granulosa cells is called aromatase. Aromatase is going to take testosterone and convert it into estrogen. So when we say that luteinizing hormone increases estrogen production, it has to go through several steps to actually get this estrogen production to go up. Watch this. When estrogen production increases, this estrogen actually feeds back onto the hypothalamus and onto the anterior pituitary, and eventually we're going to see a rise in luteinizing hormone. And then, of course, when luteinizing hormone rises, we'll have greater estrogen production. That estrogen will feed back again onto the anterior pituitary and cause luteinizing hormone to rise again, which then causes estrogen to rise, which will feed back and cause luteinizing hormone to rise again, and estrogen will rise again. And what kind of feedback do we have? Positive. This is a positive feedback. And you know, again, that with a positive feedback, there has to be a shut-off switch. So we're going to have to talk about what that shut-off switch is in just a second. She's bored.
Poor baby.
She wants to go out and chase one of you so she can eat you. I think we'll have you do it, Graydon.
Came out pretty quick.
You'll kind of, you know, she could probably get something off those bones. Hey, I gotta feed him somehow.
Just feed it bread.
Did she have a baby?
Huh?
She had a baby?
No,
Sitting
no.
there really quick.
No.
Thanks, Mark.
There is actually a disease that runs in her line, and it's actually called Lou Gehrig's disease. It's amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and it's a neurological disorder. And so she cannot have puppies because we don't want to continue breeding her line at all. She luckily has no problems from it, but this neurological disorder, eventually when they get to a certain age, it actually causes them to become completely paralyzed. And so it's a very bad disorder. So Bug is actually from France, and we didn't know that she had this disorder until her dad died from it. So. Okay, so now we have luteinizing hormone rising and follicle stimulating hormone rise, and estrogen levels rising. So LH and estrogen, they just keep going up and up and up. Now, the question is why? Why do we have this? Okay, so look here again. On the overhead, you have the follicle, which has become a mature egg, okay, and around it are the theca and granulosa cells here in pink. And over time, as estrogen levels go up, you start to see this fluid being built up around the egg. Eventually, you get a ton of fluid built up around this egg. And notice how all this fluid here is actually pushing out on the outside of the ovary. This fluid starts to build up so much that it actually creates a pressure on the wall of the ovary to the point where the wall of the ovary explodes. And what that does is the fluid pushes out and the egg gets pushed out in that fluid, and now you have ovulation. So in order for the egg to actually leave the ovary, you have to build up all of this, what we would call follicular fluid. And estrogen is responsible for this fluid production. So the more estrogen that goes up, the more follicular fluid is made, and you keep going up and up and up until it's kind of like, a big zit on the side of the wall. There's so much pressure, it explodes. And then we have ovulation of this egg, okay?
What creates the fluid?
The theca and granulosa cells make that fluid, but it's under the influence of estrogen. So estrogen levels are going to rise and create a pressure on the wall of the ovary until that wall ruptures and ovulation can occur. Now, as soon as ovulation occurs, take a look again at the overhead at the theca and granulosa cells here as this egg ovulates. They're already starting to change color. And within just a few seconds, they start to kind of look a little puffy, and they start to look yellow, and then within just about a minute, the theca and granulosa cells look totally different. They look very swollen, and they're a bright yellow color. And these theca and granulosa cells are now renamed the corpus luteum. Now, corpus means body, luteum means yellow. So right after ovulation, the theca and granulosa cells are going to change into what we would call the corpus luteum. As the thickened granulosa cells change and become the corpus luteum, these cells also start to secrete a different hormone. This hormone is progesterone. So no longer are we producing estrogen, now we're going to produce progesterone. Progesterone's job is to feed back on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary to turn off GnRH, LH, and FSH. So we're going to turn off this positive feedback, but we're going to turn off all the hormone secretion. So this is a negative feedback. So we've just turned off all those hormones we were just producing. No more GnRH, no more FSH, LH, no more estrogen. All stops. Unless they're looking for a bad guy. And then they never sleep, and they never stop. Okay, so why would you want progesterone levels to go up at all during the reproductive cycle in the female so that we turn off GnRH, LH, FSH, estrogen? Why would you want that to ever occur?
So you don't get pregnant again?
Yeah, it prevents pregnancy. So after ovulation, she may get pregnant. And so then right after ovulation, you wouldn't want her to be able to get pregnant again. You have to stop ovulation from occurring. So we had ovulation occur, and then we're going to suppress all these hormones so ovulation can't occur just in case she's pregnant. Because could you imagine if she could ovulate after she was pregnant? That means she could get pregnant after she's already pregnant. So you ask her, how long is it before you're due? Well, I'm due in 9 months, I'm due in 6 months, and I'm due in 2 weeks. There wouldn't be any children born after that. I mean, women would just stop having babies after that. You have to get pregnant after you're pregnant, okay? It would not be a good thing. So we have this ovulation occurring here, and then the corpus luteum comes along to make progesterone. And we want to keep ovulation from occurring. Now, of course, what if she doesn't get pregnant? Okay? If she doesn't get pregnant, you don't want to keep suppressing all these hormones. You want ovulation to be able to occur again. So if she's not pregnant, then the corpus luteum needs to go away. Progesterone needs to go away. Okay? So the corpus luteum, it potentially can last for a long time. So if she's pregnant, she doesn't ovulate. Or the corpus luteum potentially can go away pretty quick if she's not pregnant. So we're going to talk about what happens to the corpus luteum if she is pregnant and if she isn't pregnant. Yep. she is pregnant, we don't want ovulation to occur. So we don't want progesterone to go away. We want to keep it there so it suppresses GnRH, LH, FSH. Okay? If she's not pregnant, we want the corpus luteum to go away. We don't want any progesterone anymore. So let's talk about if she's not pregnant first, then we'll talk about if she is pregnant. So the corpus luteum, if there is no pregnancy, will go through apoptosis 7 days after ovulation. What is apoptosis? Okay, so this is pre-programmed cellular suicide, literally. The cell has instructions to kill itself. So if there's no pregnancy, 7 days after ovulation occurs, all these corpus luteum cells will destroy themselves. They're gone, progesterone levels drop, and then we can get ovulation again. But if she is pregnant, that means there's a fertilized egg. Now, we need to stop apoptosis before day 7 occurs, okay? So that little fertilized egg is going to start dividing and dividing and dividing over the next 7 days. And it's going to become what we would call an embryo. There's going to be several hundred cells, and you have an embryo. That embryo will secrete a very important hormone that prevents the corpus luteum from committing suicide. So on day 7, this embryo is secreting HCG. And HCG stands for human chorionic gonadotropin. It's this HCG that prevents apoptosis of the corpus luteum cells. So HCG is going to prevent apoptosis of the corpus luteum, which also means progesterone levels are going to stay up throughout pregnancy, and there's not going to be any more ovulation.
So theca and granulosa cells don't secrete progesterone until it becomes the corpus luteum.
That's right. Now, just for your information, the corpus luteum is the main source of producing estrogen during pregnancy until maybe about the 4th month of pregnancy. During the 4th month of pregnancy, that's when the placenta is really fully formed, and it will take over making most of the progesterone. So the corpus luteum is pretty much on the back burner now because the placenta is making a ton of progesterone. Any questions so far?
Would that at all affect if the child is a boy or male?
No,
This progesterone doesn't affect testosterone.
no, not at all. Now, it does, but it doesn't. So this progesterone is suppressing GnRH, LH, FSH. So remember, in this step where luteinizing hormone makes estrogen, testosterone is produced here to make that estrogen, okay? But in the fetus, this isn't affecting the fetus, this is affecting the mom. So it doesn't. And obviously in a male, he's making his testosterone mainly as a fetus in the adrenal glands. So there's not a lot of testosterone production in the testes in the fetal stage. That is not going to actually occur. Well, there's 2 times that testosterone production in a male goes up really high. And the first time is on the day of birth. Because in the unborn baby boy, his testes are actually formed right around the belly button. Okay? They're not in the testicular sac. When he's born, on that very first day, if you measure testosterone levels in a little baby boy who was just born, they will be as high as an adult male's levels of testosterone. And those super high levels of testosterone actually cause the testes to descend from the abdominal cavity into the scrotal sac. And after about day 3, those levels go down until he goes through puberty, and then those levels go back up. So during the fetal stage of development, testosterone levels are fairly low. They're higher than in a female fetus, but they're way lower than in a child or an adult. Any questions so far? Yes?
So if a woman had a hysterectomy, does it still?
Okay, you can have a partial or a total. Hysterectomy is typically just the uterus. So an oophorectomy is removing the ovaries. So when we say it's a total hysterectomy, it's usually both we're talking about. So if she still has her ovaries, all of this is still occurring. None of this has anything to do with the uterus, at least at this point. There's nothing, and so all these hormones are still being produced, and ovulation can still occur. Of course, there's no uterus, so the baby doesn't have the ability to grow.
Where would they attach the tubes to?
Where do they attach the tubes to?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we remove the uterus, okay, it's not that they attach the tubes because the tubes are gone, okay? But these ovaries are cut from here, but they remain attached to their blood supply. So there's connective tissue around them, and so the ovaries stay in the pelvic cavity. But this uterus is gone, and so are the fallopian tubes.
So you have a full hysterectomy, does that cause you to go into menopause quicker?
Yes, it causes instantaneous menopause. Because menopause is nothing but the fact that she runs out of stem cells. She doesn't have the ability to go through this whole cycle anymore. And then there's also changes in the hypothalamus where she also doesn't secrete GnRH, LH, and FSH at the same level. Those hormones go down dramatically. And so we don't have any more stem cells in the ovaries. We don't have the same level of hormones. Everything decreases dramatically.
But you just have a partial, that doesn't.
No, doesn't affect anything. Everything stays the same.
For the meiosis part, do we need to explain that?
No,
No,
Just that it happens.
Goes through, okay.
absolutely, just that it happens. Any other questions?
Is that it?
Not even close.
Okay, so we are also going to affect the uterus. Okay, so we need to talk about the endometrial lining inside the uterus. The lining that changes each month, okay? Now, we're going to talk about the fact that the endometrial lining has 2 layers to it. It has what we call a basal layer, and then it also has a functional layer. And the functional layer is really what goes through changes. The basal layer just kind of sits there, doesn't do a whole bunch, but the functional layer can change. Now, the female reproductive cycle is based off of a 28-day cycle. So you have day 1, you have day 28. Okay, so during this 28-day cycle, we're going to say that day 1 is the first day that she sees red blood. Okay, so that's going to be day 1 of our cycle. And on day 1, all the hormones pretty much that we've been talking about are starting to go up. GnRH, driving FSH, LH, even estrogen levels. They're all rising. And we know that when estrogen goes up, LH goes up, estrogen goes up, LH goes up. So these levels are going to rise even more than GnRH or FSH. You're going to see a tremendous rise in estrogen and in LH. Okay? And they continue to rise until ovulation, which is about day 14. Because we also know that on day 14, this is the day that we form the corpus luteum. So we're going to see another hormone rising here, and that hormone is going to be progesterone. And we know that on day 7, which will be day 21, after ovulation, 1 of 2 things is going to occur. Either progesterone continues or progesterone's gone. So if we have pregnancy, progesterone levels stay. If we don't have pregnancy on day 21, the corpus luteum goes through apoptosis, and we see progesterone levels falling. So this is going to affect our LH, FSH, GnRH levels. So we know when progesterone goes up, all of these levels are going to go down.
On day 21 as well.
On day 21, because progesterone levels are up, all those levels are going to go down. Now, what will happen to GnRH, LH, and FSH if she's pregnant? If she's pregnant, what happens to GnRH, LH, FSH, estrogen? They stay down because you don't want ovulation. But if she's not pregnant, they're all going to start coming back up again. So we'll see these stay down until somewhere around day 1 again, and then they'll all start rising again if there's no pregnancy. Everything's going to start coming back up. If there is a pregnancy, they all stay down for the next 9 months because we don't want her to ovulate again. So now we know between day 1 and day 14, estrogen levels are rising. And one of the things about estrogen is that throughout our entire body, estrogen can stimulate mitosis. So between day 1 and day 14, we see mitosis of the functional layer in the uterus. So estrogen levels between days 1 to 14 are rising, and they are stimulating mitosis of the functional layer. Now, of course, day 14 is ovulation, so in case she gets pregnant, we want a really nice, thick, functional layer for the embryo to embed itself in. A second thing that estrogen is doing is that in this basal layer, we have very specialized arteries that kind of look like little corkscrews here. These are called spiral arteries. And estrogen also affects those spiral arteries and kind of causes them to unwind. And as these layers get thicker, the spiral arteries are much further away if they stay in the basal layer. So as we get more cells, we're going to move the spiral arteries out into this functional layer so we can feed these cells. But also, if an embryo enters in here, these spiral arteries will also be able to feed the embryo. So remember, ovulation is going to occur on day 14, and then it takes only 24 hours for fertilization to occur. So there's got to be a sperm hanging around between day 14 and day 15, because after day 15 the egg dies. So we say basically fertilization occurs on day 14, just like ovulation, and then it takes 7 days for this fertilized egg to move down the fallopian tubes. And so on day 21, it enters into the uterus. We also know on day 21, the corpus luteum may or may not stay alive, depending on if she is or isn't pregnant. So let's talk about what happens if she isn't pregnant. So if there is no embryo, okay, on day 21 there's no embryo, that means the corpus luteum is going to go through apoptosis. And what happens to progesterone levels? They fall. Okay, now, we haven't talked about progesterone in any of this so far because it really doesn't do anything to any of this. When ovulation occurs and progesterone levels go up, all progesterone does is kind of maintain the scene. Keeps everything just like it is, doesn't let anything change. It's kind of a maintenance hormone, okay? And a lot of times you'll hear people call progesterone the hormone of pregnancy because it's really the only hormone that stays up during all of pregnancy. So when progesterone rises on day 14, it's only maintaining all the work that estrogen has done. So if progesterone levels drop because she's not pregnant, then we're not going to maintain all of this. So the first thing that's going to happen is all these spiral arteries will start kind of twisting up again, and they'll start pulling themselves back into the basal layer. So if progesterone levels go down on day 21, you'll start to see all these spiral arteries pulling back. So the spiral arteries between day 21 and 28 start pulling back into the functional layer. So the spiral arteries are corkscrewing up again, and they're pulling back into the basal layer as the progesterone levels fall. Now notice we don't have a lot of blood supply to all these functional layer cells anymore, and so these cells are going to die. So what you see is during this time, these cells start to die. So we say that the cells of the functional layer are going to slough off. That means not only do they die, but they fall off the inside of the uterus. They don't attach anymore. So during days 21 to 28, she may see kind of a brownish discharge. Those are the dead cells from the functional layer. On day 1, again, these cells have died off so much, it actually exposes a little bit of these spiral arteries, and red blood can be seen. And so her menses is started. That won't last long because all the functional layer cells from day 1, as estrogen levels are going up, they start to grow. And so there'll be a little bit of bleeding for maybe 3 or 5 days. If there is pregnancy, everything is maintained for the whole pregnancy.
Does that bleeding occur the 3 to 5 days? Does that occur from day 1?
1 to day 3 or 1 to day 5. If it's occurring more than that, usually it's in a much younger girl that all her hormonal levels aren't quite regulated yet. By the way, the youngest person, the youngest female in your household will cause everyone else to cycle with her. Because all of these hormones come out in her sweat. And then you, ladies, inhale it, and it changes your entire cycle. Stupid kids. Here's something else that's really interesting. Did you know that men in their sweat also secrete testosterone? And somehow in this whole cycle, it is actually controlled by his testosterone levels. They did a really interesting study where they took this college that was, still is, it's an all-girls college on the East Coast. It's called Wellesley's College. And they asked all these ladies at the college for 2 months, please do not have anything to do with any guy. Don't leave the campus. This is a huge college-wide experiment. And by basically the second month, most of the women on the campus were pretty irregular already. So then what they did is they brought a guy in that nobody knew, and they didn't have him talk to anybody. All he did was walk through every dormitory. And they asked all the ladies of the dormitory, please stand in front of your door. Don't say anything to him, don't touch him, nothing, just he's going to walk by. After he walked by, everybody noticed the next month, everybody was pretty regular again. So that it appears that the testosterone levels that a male secretes through his sweat into the air, when she breathes it in, helps to actually regulate her cycle. And a household of all women typically have a very irregular cycle. So when you ask what is he good for, there you go. And ain't that important?
Would that be like?
Listen, I'm looking clean too, okay?
And when you bring home a big paycheck, you're going to be a whole package.
So Dr. Harvey, some of the women, they don't have regular menstruation and they are still like not married yet. I mean, not experiencing any sexual. After that, why is it like after having a baby, their menstruation is back to like normal?
It changes all the wiring in your brain. Makes a big change in how the brain is wired.
So, why is it that when a female is pregnant, you hear sometimes that the male gets her symptoms?
Well, okay, so all of these hormones are airborne. We're all sweating them out. So she now has lots of progesterone. And guess what? He's inhaling it, and now he's feeling those symptoms. Because he has never had high levels of progesterone. This is actually pretty dang tough on him. Because he has all kinds of weird symptoms he's never had before. Like his breasts start to hurt, and he gets morning sickness, and this is why. So he's not making it up, trust me. He's feeling the same thing you are.
Do you think it makes a difference if, like, a woman lives in a household full of men? Once you have, like, maybe less, like, not bleed as heavy, maybe less symptoms,
Yes.
where if she's with a house of women,
Yes,
heavier periods, more pain.
absolutely, yes.
What was she asking?
if, let's say you are a female and all you have are brothers, okay, and there's no other female in the house, does that change how heavy the cycle is? And the answer is yes. In comparison to living in a house of all females. If you're a female and you live in a house of all males with 0 other females in your house, you will not have as heavy of a cycle because your testosterone levels are so high, it suppresses a lot of these hormones. If you're living in a house of all females, now all these hormone levels are higher than you would normally make them because you're getting theirs too. Like for instance, okay, I have a very good friend who we worked together at San Diego State University, and he was doing research on how estrogen affects certain females. And he had to actually mix these concoctions up that had very high levels of estrogen. So he wore gloves and he wore, you know, a gown and everything, but he never thought about wearing a mask. And so over the years, he was actually inhaling all this airborne estrogen. And over time, he actually had to have a double mastectomy because he had such high estrogen levels that his mitosis levels went so high, he ended up with breast cancer. And it nearly killed him. So these hormones float in the air, and they affect people, and they change personality, and they change how hard your cycle is or not, and you know, they can do all kinds of different things. Like here's another one. Cortisol will inhibit luteinizing hormone secretion, which means estrogen won't go up, which means follicular fluid won't go up, which means she won't ovulate. So that the more stressed out you are, the less likely you are to get pregnant.
Okay, so why do women athletes tend to not start their menses until they...
Because they don't have enough fat. And remember I told you, the other cell that makes aromatase is fat cells. So they have such little amounts of fat on their body that they actually don't make as high of estrogen levels, so they also don't ovulate. Any questions?
With the heavier bleeding, is it more of the functional layer sloughing off?
Yes. Yes. And by the way, during pregnancy, some women will bleed, and this means that their progesterone levels aren't high enough. They're not maintaining, and the functional layer is sloughing off. Now look at what the problem is. If there's an embryo in here, or there's a fetus growing in here, and the functional layer sloughs off, it could fall out. So bleeding during pregnancy is a very bad thing.
Is that because of miscarriage?
It is one of the major causes. However, 75% of all pregnancies end in miscarriages that the woman doesn't even know she had. Because the majority of those embryos are deformed. And so they just naturally miscarry. And she never even knows she's pregnant because it happens so early on in the pregnancy.
So in menopause, you go crazy because just the hormones are all out of whack?
Yes. So in menopause, what's happening is the uterus is basically stopping producing everything. And those estrogen and progesterone levels control the astrocytes in the brain and how the synapses stay. So when the estrogen and progesterone levels fall, those astrocytes let synapses fall apart.
So why is it like, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, why is
Because
it?
they're trying to figure out how do I put it back together, and what do I do, how do I get that synapse. So there's a lot of rewiring that's going on. So it's like a short circuit for a little bit, and then it comes back together, short circuit, because it doesn't drop all at once. It's like everything else. It goes down and then up, and then down and up, and yeah. And we don't really officially call it menopause until all that crap stops. And you
Okay,
have
so
nothing for 1 year.
premenopausal.
Yeah, so
And
everything
that
is,
could be like 5 months, and then it can come back again.
yes. And you can not have it for 2 years and it can come back again.
Why is it that menopause women like their mood swings are like really bad?
That's what we're talking about right there. Because what happens is as the hormones are dropping, and then sometimes you'll make some more, and then they drop, and then sometimes you make some more. It changes synapses in the brain. So these synapses kind of short circuit. And eventually, when the hormone levels drop all the way, those synapses figure out how to come back without the use of estrogen and progesterone. That's the problem.
Okay, so, keto and, you know, the cycle and babies, what's the deal with that? Because there seems to be like an abundance of keto babies, people that have suffered from like PCOS and they've been trying to conceive for years.
Okay, now remember, you're talking about steroid hormones. So if I don't eat enough fat in my diet, how do I produce enough of these steroid hormones? Because I've got to have that fat as a precursor to make cholesterol to make these steroid hormones in the cell. So I won't have any estrogen, progesterone, testosterone changes because those are all made from fat. So if I'm eating a low-fat diet, I may not be able to make enough of these hormones to even have a cycle. So I have this amenorrhea where I don't have any menstrual cycle at all. Or maybe I have a menstrual cycle once every 18 months.
Oh, okay, so that's why, so the increase in the fat in the diet. So
Will cause ovulation.
So if your daughter's very irregular, then you need to tell her to quit eating a crap food and start eating a little
Yes.
fat and get rid of the sugar.
Yes,
And she
exactly.
should mellow out on her own.
It should help, yes. And especially women who can't get pregnant, most of the time it's due to low fat in their diet. Most, not always, but most of the time.
How does birth control?
Birth control. Birth control is basically high levels of progesterone that inhibit GnRH, FSH, LH. So the ovulation cannot occur.
What about if you do ovulate or you still have a period?
You still have a period, but it is enough to inhibit ovulation. So the functional layer can still grow, but then on birth control, it doesn't grow as much. You don't bleed as much, okay? So usually the period can be as little as a single drop of blood to maybe just a couple of days of bleeding occurring. So it lowers all of those hormone levels, especially low enough so there's no ovulation.
Are there harmful effects of being on birth control because it like changes those levels? Are those myths
You know,
when they say
women
like,
have been on birth control for the last almost 60 years, and they haven't seen any long-term problems with that. The only problem comes once you get older, like into your 40s or so, you increase your risk of blood clots, especially if you're in your 40s and you're smoking. Then you do not want to be on birth control because blood clot risk and stroke and all goes really high. Yeah.
So when you have an irregular menstrual cycle, why do the doctors tell you to get on birth control to regulate it?
Because, okay, so you have so many days of these pills, right? So those days all have different amounts of hormones in them so that they're mimicking what this cycle is supposed to be doing. And so it should help you to become more regular because the person who's not regular isn't producing the right amount of hormones at each step. That's why they tell you to do it. It's not going to help in the long term. It helps in the short term. But the reason you're irregular is typically because your diet's bad, you exercise too much, or you're under too much stress, or your hypothalamus hasn't totally matured yet because you're still young. There's a whole host of reasons why you may not be regular. What I saw in the question, yeah.
Why do the blood clots start forming when you're 40 with the birth control?
Because everything friggin' starts to break down around then, and things don't work right. So the mechanism to form blood clots seems to become more sensitive to levels of progesterone, and so you're much more likely to form them. And then, of course, if somebody's smoking cigarettes, they're already more likely to form blood clots. And so you just add all of that together, and it potentially could be a disaster.
I've heard before that like birth control helps to like lessen menstrual cramps. So why is that?
Absolutely frigging no idea, because nobody knows what causes cramping. Nobody has a clue. That's why there's no pills on the market to stop it, because nobody's figured out what causes it.
The uterus expands and during the end term of pregnancy, Does the Frank Sterling effect have anything to do with contractions?
Not really, because the expansion is so slow over time, they're already lined up.
If you have a woman who's been on birth control pills or any type of birth control that's kept them from having periods, does that affect menopause or anything?
Depends on the birth control pill. Some of the thoughts are, if it's a strong enough pill, it may lengthen menopause symptoms. There's really no good studies out there, though, to say that that's the case.
Will they not go through it, or will it delay it longer, do you know?
No idea. I have never seen a study on that. I've had that question a zillion times, and I have never been able to find a study to answer that question. So the answer could be yes or no. I don't really know, to be honest. It makes sense, but I don't really know. Any other question? Okay, then let's talk about the male, okay? So, during puberty, the male secretes GnRH from the hypothalamus, and that causes the anterior pituitary to make FSH and LH. Now, obviously, he doesn't have a follicle, and he doesn't have a corpus luteum. But the reason that we use these same names in the male is because they found these hormones in the female first, and they'd already named them, and then they found, oh shoot, the men have the same exact hormones, so you're stuck with the female names. Now, let me see if I can get around here. FSH increases spermatogenesis.